My name is Satbir Khalsa. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. I've been doing research on yoga since 2001, mostly clinical trials, applying yoga for a number of different types of medical conditions, including insomnia, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. And I've been personally practicing yoga since 1971. I practice a style of yoga called Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. So I was in university back in my early 20s, and I was interested in engaging in a contemplative practice. And at the time, there was a new course being offered at one of the colleges at the University of Toronto in Canada. And it was a course on yoga. And I had just been contemplating starting up yoga classes, so that seemed to be a perfect fit. So then I showed up at the first class, and there was a teacher teaching yoga, and I just kept on practicing, and 2 years later I moved into a yoga ashram community where I was practicing this on a daily basis as a lifestyle, and then of course also teaching as well, and never looked back from that period in time. So I was always interested in research and science, and in fact I finished my Bachelor in Science degree around the time that I had moved into a yoga community. And I was working in the community, running with the community businesses and practicing yoga and teaching yoga. And I got the passion again for my interest in science, but this time it was directed at what I was experiencing in the yoga practices. And what I really wanted to study was these changes of state of consciousness and the change in mood and behavior that are accompanied by these yoga practices. I felt like this was something that had not been researched at this point and was really deserving of research. So in the mid-'70s, I set a goal for myself of conducting research in yoga. So I went back to school and I got into a graduate program, got my PhD in neurophysiology and neuroscience with an aim of conducting research, and then did postdoctoral fellowships in neuroscience to continue that. Now, I wasn't really able to start doing yoga research until I was able to get a grant, which those grants were not available till the early 2000s. So it was actually 25 years between when I set the intention and when I actually started doing the research on yoga. So my research has primarily been clinical trials work, and that involves looking at the benefits of yoga for specific medical conditions. So the first one that I looked at was chronic insomnia. Now, I've also had an interest in understanding and studying the basic mechanisms by which yoga is generating its effects. And one of the most interesting ones is how these practices can lead to these deeper states of consciousness, the so-called flow experience, this unitive state of consciousness. That's sort of the primary interest that I've always had, but I've also got the general interest of just yoga's benefits in general and the more mundane aspects of yoga practice. So we have looked at studies of yoga for chronic stress and yoga for stress in individuals who are under high stress, and that is one of the major outcomes of yoga practice. It's one of the biggest reasons that people practice yoga. And so we have been looking at the effects of yoga for stress and improving mood state. And that is very valuable because in modern society we have a very large burden of chronic stress, which is actually tied into many of the major chronic diseases that we have. Stress is a major factor in many of those diseases. So this has also been very, very useful work in terms of its practicality. And then more recently, we've shifted the focus in my laboratory on studying the effects and the benefits of yoga in the public school setting. And this is basically yoga as prevention. This is something that we think is a skill set that will allow young adults and students to grow up with a skill set to be able to cope with strong emotions, with stress, and become more functional in society, and avoid a lot of the mental mood disturbances and stress-induced problems that face adults in modern society. And so we're seeing this improvement in these children in the school setting. They're able to cope with stress, they're learning these strategies, they're applying them in their daily lives. They're even sharing them with their parents and their siblings because they're so efficacious. They're making them change, and they're also improving not only their ability to cope with stress and emotion, it's also increasing their awareness and inspiring them to move in positive directions, in health-related directions, and away from negative behaviors. So that kind of nuts and bolts effects of yoga practice on stress and mind-body awareness is very satisfying because you're actually helping people change the direction of their lives. So there's been a significant amount of research on how these yoga practices work. Now, when we talk about yoga, what we're really talking about, for those of us that are involved in research, is really traditional yoga practices. It's not just the postures and the exercises, which are the most obvious and clear manifestation of what people think of yoga. But yoga also includes a set of breathing techniques, breathing practices. It also includes a set of deep relaxation techniques. And one of the most important components of yoga is the meditative component. There's a mindfulness, concentrative, focus of attention component of yoga that's very important to yoga as a contemplative practice. So the research that we've seen over the past few decades, and it's been really increasing exponentially, both the quality and the quantity of this research, there's sort of 4 domains in which this multi-component aspect of yoga practice works. So obviously on the physical level, that's the most simple one to understand. You're improving flexibility, you're doing movement, you're improving muscle coordination, et cetera, you're stretching the muscles, you're stretching the tissues. That generates a positive effect. On the physical plane, you're also looking at these breathing practices. That's improving breathing function, respiratory function, and that also has a direct impact on stress regulation. So just from the physical component, you get a lot of benefits, and those are very helpful and actually translate into psychological improvements. The second major domain is the one I've been talking about, which is this ability to self-regulate, to be able to control internal state. And that's largely around managing your response to stress and also managing strong emotions. This is the capability that humans have to be able to generate a state of relaxation in their body even when they're confronted with stressful situations or strong emotions. And people that practice yoga become more capable of managing stress and coping with emotions more effectively. So that's a major domain. The other major domain, which I've also alluded to, is the idea of controlling the focus of attention. And this is the meditative component of yoga practice. When you meditate, meditation is very simply the focus of attention in a relaxed, non-analytical manner. And when you do that, you stop mind wandering, and you stop a lot of the negative thoughts that come through mind wandering. And as you continue to practice that, that starts to change your brain activity, it starts to change your brain structure even. And what's happening is that people are becoming more into what we would call a neutral mind space, as opposed to being thrown up and down by the negative thoughts that happen to come a lot of times when we are mind wandering. And so this meditative component not only helps deal with that, but it also increases the ability to attend, to focus your attention. Because when you're meditating, you're engaging the attention networks in the brain. And the more you do that, the better you become at focusing your attention. So when you give attention tasks or attention tests to people who are meditators, they do better because you're increasing that focus of attention. And that translates behaviorally into an increase in mind-body awareness. People become more sensitive to what's going on mentally. They become more sensitive to what's going on in their body. They can even watch and stand back and watch the flow of thought in a sort of an objective way, which is called this process of metacognition. And that really engages this whole idea of managing stress, of creating some degree of distance so that you are not immediately as reactive as you were before you began this meditation practice. So that's another major domain. And then the final domain, for which we have the least amount of evidence, is this experience, this deeper, profound experience. And this usually takes a bit of practice to reach. It may take months or years for people to finally start experiencing this. And it may not be in a long, prolonged, unitive state of consciousness. It may be just a brief glimpse, a brief experience during the meditation or during the deep relaxation where people feel this intense state of flow and of unity and of peace and harmony and calmness. And that is a very profound experience for those that have had that opportunity to experience that. And even though it may last just a few seconds, it is so deep that it actually changes people's perceptions on who they are, what their relationship is to themselves, to the rest of the world, what their goals are, what their values are. And people will actually use the phrase, yoga changed my life. And it can be that deep. And it's usually a change that's very positive. People gravitate towards healthy behaviors, towards positive behaviors, and away from negative behaviors. So all 4 of those domains really cut across virtually all the aspects of what it is to be a human being. So just as yoga is a multi-component practice with multiple components to the practice, it has multiple effects on those multiple domains, and ultimately it leads to multiple changes on multiple levels of behavior, all the way from the mundane of coping with stress, coping with emotion, to deeper ones like behaving better in terms of interpersonal relationships, and then to the deepest domains of experiencing this unitive state, which we might even call as a state of spirituality, increasing their spirituality, this deeper experience with oneself. The research and the science behind yoga is really very fascinating, very interesting, and growing exponentially. Every week there's a new publication showing us some new facet of how these practices are changing our psychology, our nervous system behavior, and even our nervous system structure. And I think it's really interesting for people who are involved in yoga practice or even interested in doing yoga practice to hear this, because this is now objective evidence. This is no longer just anecdotes of, hey, I had a great yoga class, I'm feeling really chill, and I'm feeling really calm, and it helps me with my stress. But now we're actually seeing how it affects the brain, how it affects behavior, how it affects psychological characteristics. And I think a lot of people that are yoga teachers or so-called yoga therapists really would like to use this language. I think we're at a phase in society right now where yoga has become part of the culture. So surveys are showing that actually 10% of the population is practicing yoga. And I think that's the grassroots movement that's continuing to grow, and that's an exponentially increasing popularity. But I think what's happening now is that yoga is starting to move deeper into culture, deeper into society, into our professional realm. And that includes things like medical venues, educational venues, the workplace. And in order for yoga to be translated and described, I think the best language that we can use is the language of science. And we can talk about, look, this is a great practice for your workplace because many of your workers are stressed, they have chronic low back pain, and yoga works this way and this way and this way to help with this particular disorder and to help with their functionality in the workplace. Not only will it help them with stress and pain, but it can even help with job satisfaction. So that's the kind of argument you can use, citing the research that's been done to promote, yoga's practice in the workplace. And you can make the same argument for yoga in the public school setting. You can make the same argument for yoga for a variety of therapeutic conditions, whether it's cancer or whether it's type 2 diabetes or whether it's depression or anxiety. There's now science that shows us that there's a rationale for how yoga can help with these particular disorders. So that's an argument you could make when you're bringing it to a hospital clinic or to a health center of some kind. So I think this languaging of yoga is fitting perfectly with yoga's insertion into the deeper professional aspects of modern society. And so I'm giving more and more lectures and talks to individuals who are interested in learning this science and learning the language, being able to speak the language of the science and how yoga works.